Okay, well, it's pretty awesome to have two Tasmanian adventurers, Matt Brain and John McLaine. Nice rhyme there, joining us this evening. I think I've been following their adventures for a while, and I'm not sure if many of you would have come across them on YouTube, but they've been to some pretty incredible spots. And so we thought it would be, especially Nick, thought it'd be a great idea to get the guys on tonight and to have a bit of a chat about bushwalking and photography and adventure. And so I'll pass it over to Nick tonight.
Yeah, welcome everyone. Thanks, Luke. It's good to have you all here again for episode 8. I think we're doing all right to get to this point and still have a very healthy audience, and I hope you're enjoying it all, and a very varied show. Last week we had, what did we have last week? The aerials? Was it last week?
Yeah, that's right. Feels like it was a lot longer ago.
How can you forget, Nick? It's like forever.
Oh, no, I must have fallen asleep, mate. I can't remember. No. Yeah, but yeah, it's certainly a very different show tonight. Yes, we've got two guests that are very well-known members of the bushwalking community and the photography community in Tasmania, and that is Matt Brain. Now, Matt's a doctor based in Launceston. And John's also, John McLaine is also based in Launceston, and he is a geography and outdoor education teacher. So pretty relevant for tonight's show. Both of them, they tend to do a lot of trips together. They're very good friends, and they do some pretty hardcore bushwalking. So they'll be able to give us some insight into their adventures and how they go about preparing for that, being safe for that, and how they go about taking photographs while they're out there, and also give you guys some tips, particularly those that may not have done sort of bushwalking or multi-day bushwalking before, and we'll talk about how you can get into it and be safe. So welcome, Matt, and welcome, John.
Thank you, Nick. Great to be here.
Great to have you both. I guess we'll start with you, John. You've got a long history of bushwalking and outdoor adventures in Tasmania and elsewhere in the world. Did you just want to introduce, how you got into it and what you do?
That'd be a pleasure. Thank you, Nick. Look, I was lucky enough to start in the outdoors as a young boy. I really started doing serious and difficult trips in my teen years with my older brother. I remember when I was 13 and he was 15, my parents drove us up to Lake St Clair and sent us off on a winter trip to the labyrinth and surrounding Duquesne Range, just as a couple of boys. Now, at that stage, they had no idea how remote and inappropriate it was to send two teenage boys off by themselves to go and have an adventure like that. But we got away with it, and we sort of had our own crash course in how to prepare for and do serious wilderness trips. And then, progressing from there, I did my first month-long Southwest trip at the age of 15. So by the time I was a late teenager, I was pretty comfortable with how to go about preparing for expeditions in the Southwest. And of course, taking a camera was an important part of those journeys to document it. So I remember my father gave me his Canon AT1, which was a match needle light meter, simple little Canon, and a couple of rolls of Kodachrome 25 to get me started. And off I went to take photographs with those. Some years later, Matt had a pretty similar pathway into the outdoors when he was a young boy as well. And I'll let Matt tell you about his introduction to it. But so my pathway as a really young teenager just happened to coincide with the years in the lead up to the Franklin Dam campaign. And I had the opportunity to paddled the Franklin for the first time as a 16-year-old. And in fact, nobody in our group was over 18. We were all just a bunch of young kids. Once again, our parents drove us to the bridge and we jumped out and off we went down the Franklin. And it's just so inappropriate for people without experience to go and do those kinds of trips, but we didn't know any better. Now, these days, of course, we'd plan a much more logical and structured pathway into the outdoors, whereas our learning curve was very much self-directed, but we managed to get away with it and we learned as we went. And so by the time I was into my 20s, I was starting to become more ambitious about off-track routes and basically just spending hours poring over maps and looking at places and thinking, I wonder what that's like. And, you know, it turns out that these were places that were remote and hard to get to. And those were the kinds of challenging trips that I really enjoyed doing. So right through my 20s and into my 30s and beyond now, I'm in my mid 50s and still doing these kind of journeys. Throughout my pathway into the outdoors, it often involved standard bushwalking and mountain walking, but it also often involved small boats. I like to do trips where you either need a small boat to get to a remote mountain, or you need to traverse remote mountains to get to small, or to get to rivers that need to be paddled. So that combination of land and water journey has really become, I guess, my strength over the last 30 years or so. And many years ago now, I discovered Matt, and Matt had those same passions that I share. Matt's over the last 20 years taken his photography far more seriously than I have. I'm more of a retired photographer now, but Matt's still producing beautiful work, as you've no doubt seen. And we sort of struck up a partnership. I don't know how long ago, Matt, but how long ago would you reckon it would be, Matt?
Oh, it depends what we're talking about. When I was 16, I had a pair of downhill skis and I was down in your garage with you grinding a face into them to use them as cross countries. So
that's true.
Yep, long time.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when Matt was, you know, really young, 15 or 16, we used to do these quite difficult trips into the Tasmanian alpine areas, where Matt used to carry in his rucksack an enormous mountain of textbooks. He would have a huge chemistry book, great biology book, a massive mathematics book. He'd carry a huge stack of them, and we'd get to camp and the rest of the party would be relaxing and, you know, tired, but Matt would get his torch out, or candle back in those days, and study his textbooks by candlelight and torchlight for hours on end. It obviously paid off for him to get him where he is now in his, you know, senior position in medicine. But I remember at the time it was pretty dedicated work.
Well, that's two kind of unusual combinations, I think, in a way. It's someone carrying textbooks. But secondly, would you say, John and Matt, that style of travel is a little bit more unique to Tasmania than other places?
Interestingly, Paul, the pioneers of those kind of mixed routes, I guess you'd have to say, were, you know, Bob Brown and Paul Smith, when they first decided to go down to the Franklin and check it out in the mid-70s. And, you know, they're really recognised as the pioneers of pack rafting in Australia. And a number of people have continued that pathway. There were some lean years, I reckon, throughout the late 80s into the 90s and into the 2000s. There were no boats available, and it was really only pretty serious, dedicated people were off paddling rivers with lilos, because they were the best watercraft we could get for remote rivers. And meanwhile, although we felt isolated from the rest of the world, there are actually parallels in other parts of the world, in particular Alaska. In the Alaskan landscape, they have, you know, a vast distance of wild country with rivers flowing through it. And so they had a community there of like-minded people who enjoyed linking up river travel with mountain travel. And they also, in parallel to us, developed a pack rafting ethos, which eventually The Alaskans and the Tasmanians sort of came together once modern packraft crafts became available around about 2005, 6, 7. And we now have a real global movement of pack rafting and these mixed trips using small inflatable craft, but it did spring up from Tasmania and from Alaska.
So could you explain to the average person like what it enables you to do that you wouldn't be able to do without it? Or at least that enables you to do more of, or how it influences the range on your trip, or the gear that you can carry, or some, I don't, because a lot of people might not understand what a pack raft is.
So viewers who haven't pictured these before, we're talking about inflatable craft that are maybe 2.5 meters long. It's like a miniature inflatable kayak that are made from really strong materials that can be around about 2.5 to 3 kilograms in mass. You can inflate them and you can tackle some serious white water with them. So is that you, Matt? You're sharing your screen now, are you? You're going to show some pack rafts.
Can you see one?
No, I just got a white screen.
No, just a white screen.
Oh, that didn't work, did it?
But the beauty of these small craft, once you add a PFD and a helmet and a paddle and some safety gear, you've got a heavy load, but you've got a load that you could actually carry over mountain ranges to get to rivers that can't otherwise be paddled. And it's this wonderful activity of staring for ages at maps and finding lines that haven't been traveled or maybe haven't been traveled very often, to go and see some of the more remote wilderness. These are the kind of challenges with which you really need to be able to combine water travel. There's one. Matt's got one there now.
Yep.
Water travel with land travel. So that little pack raft that Matt's got on the screen there now, it's an early generation one from around about the mid-2000s. The current boats are a bit more sophisticated with a longer water line length, look a bit more like an inflatable kayak. But these boats enable such incredible versatile lines to be drawn on maps for the purpose of traveling and seeing some of the remote parts of the country. If
John,
you restrict
with that picture up again, Matt, if you don't mind, like to me, like to the outward person, if you looked above where that boat is into, are you going to share the screen again, Matt?
Trying to
picture.
disappear.
Yeah, it's well, if you remember it, like you can see the level of density of the forest and the kind of features you're trying to walk through on land, as opposed to sitting back and floating down the river. Like your speed of travel through certain areas of terrain, and particularly in Tasmania, where it's pretty brutal, that you can just have a look at the complexity of what you're going to be trying to navigate your way through off track, in particular in Tasmania, relative to the ease of travel. It has its own dangers, and in some ways they're higher in a way, if you don't have the skills, but it's a phenomenal capacity to go through really extremely remote areas that are horrendously difficult to get to any other way. And some of the access, I guess, to some of these river points, you can't just jump off the side of the road and access the start of the river. So you literally got to walk over a range to get to the entry point for that. So I'm guessing, John and Matt, it really just expands hugely the range and the kind of areas that you can get yourself into that would just be ridiculous to try and get to on foot alone. Would that be a fair estimation? Or?
Yeah, as you can see, Matt's now sharing his screen with an image or a short video of himself paddling on Lake Rona in the Denison Range. And on that particular trip, we were able to paddle down the Upper Gordon Gorge to Lake Gordon and then traverse part of the Spires Range to then come back over the Denison Range and then complete a beautiful circle on the map back to civilization. So those kind of routes where you're combining water travel with land travel just open up so many doors. The first image that Matt shared of our friend Rob on a river with the rainforest behind him, that was on the Jane River, which, as you're probably aware, flows to the southeast of Frenchman's Cap. And it is, as you intimated, an area where the scrub is incredibly dense, very difficult to travel through. And yet you have down that river, here we go, some more Jane River terrain. Further down this beautiful river, you have some of the most stunning hue and pine stands left in Tasmania. So the rewards of the hard work to get into the Jane and then to paddle it are that you get to see some of these really beautiful, well, here we go, this is another beautiful river. This looks like the Maxwell here that Matt's
crossed
put up.
over.
So we might describe this Maxwell journey, if you like. The Maxwell is a fairly substantial river in southwest Tasmania, and it runs parallel to the Franklin River, but it's much, much harder to get to. And Matt and I together, we talked about trying to get into the Maxwell and paddling it for many years before we eventually figured out the way to do it. And that was with these modern pack rafts. We're up on the Prince of Wales range. Now he's got us bouncing all over the place. I remember when Matt and I think he's put this up here because we sat on top of the Prince of Wales range looking down at the Maxwell River Valley to the left there, and tried to logistically solve the puzzle of how to get in there and paddle this river. And in the end, the answer to that problem was to actually paddle the Jane River until we reach about the mid-Jane and then drag ourselves overland via another small river, the Algonquian rivulet, to get into the headwaters of the Maxwell, which then flows into the Denison, which then eventually disgorges into the Gordon. So basically we had to link 6 different rivers together to achieve this line. But by achieving it, we were able to visit some of the most beautiful hue and pine stands and old growth rainforest that we still have in Tasmania here in the Maxwell River. So thanks for posting those, Matt.
It's fantastic, but the thing with pack rafts though is you also have to carry them when you're not riding down the river, and that would add weight. And when you combine that, I guess, with photography gear and all the bushwalking gear, you'd be carrying pretty heavy packs, wouldn't you?
That's a really good question, Nick. So I reckon, to be honest with you, a full pack raft kit, you're going to be up around about pushing 8 kilograms possibly. So if you've got, say an 18 kilogram bushwalking pack, and then you add 8 kilos onto that, then you're up around the 26 mark. And then if you're going to add another 8 kilos of photographic gear, then you're over 30 and you've got a seriously heavy load. I think, Matt, we started the Maxwell trip in the low 30s.
Yeah, they were brutal things. And down the Jane River track, I can't remember what they weighed, but they were heavy.
The sacrifice that I've made, Nick, is on trips where I, when I was at the peak of my photographic enthusiasm, if you like, I would typically carry around about 8 kilos of camera gear and on top of whatever else I was carrying. And I'm just not strong enough to carry all of that anymore. I can't now carry a full photographic kit and a full pack rafting kit and 2 weeks worth of food. One of those has to give. It can be any 2 of those 3. But Matt still is. He's a lot stronger than me and he can carry it all.
I'm carrying a lot less than I used to now, though.
Do you feel like that the modern camera systems open up a little bit more possibility around that, with some of the new micro 4/3 systems and so on being so much smaller and lighter?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, Matt, do you want to talk through the gear you use?
Yeah, I was just trying to find that photo of me with the large format on the Propsting range, but I started with a little Konica Hexanon lens, and with my dad gave me a bit like John was saying before, and then from there migrated through several bodies that died in salt water on river crossings and various other bushwalking misfortunes, and then obviously every young Tasmanian photographer around then looked at Peter Dombrowski's work, and I migrated to large format and carried this whopping great thing around for a long time. Can you see that one there?
Yep.
That's
That's
a real camera.
I reckon that's the only view camera that's ever been on top of the Propsting range.
I reckon you're right.
We the Propsting range is sort of halfway from Lake Pedder to the west coast, and John and I, you know, got a group to drop us over there on the west coast. But so I went through the large format sort of phase, and then I remember very distinctly a guy at work telling me about his music equipment and how he had once owned an extensive set of a large amount of equipment, and then one day he just sold it all for a fraction of what it was worth. And he was saying to me, "You'll feel like that one day about your large format camera." And I'm like, "Oh no, I love my camera. It's the most beautiful thing to take photos with." And then one day, bang, sold it for a Canon 5D, and then I've slowly migrated to a Sony. I can't remember what it's called now. The full frame landscape Sony Alpha, whatever it's called. And I now just carry for most trips a single wide angle lens for the really long trips. So I've heavily dropped back on my weight. I suppose I still carry a full set of Lee filters.
What sort of range lens are you talking about for a single lens? It's a big call.
I carry a little Leica Trielma lens, which goes on the Sony via an alternative mount, and it's a fully manual lens, 16, 18 and 21 millimeter focal lengths, and just line it up. So you can't do fast work with it. You have to focus by hand and everything, but it's got the depth of field, scale, all the old sort of fashioned things that you get used to. So I quite love using that lens, and it's light and small. I could grab it out in a second.
Yeah, that'd be great. Actually, I'd love to see it.
All right, I'll switch to someone else for a second, and I'll grab that lens out.
We'll just maybe talk. We've been talking obviously about the pack rafting, and Erin's just asked about how you keep your gear dry when you're pack rafting and probably bushwalking as well. I'm not sure that all our viewers will be jumping straight onto a pack raft, but John, how do you manage keeping gear dry out in the bush?
That's a great question. Thank you, Erin. And there's a couple of different strategies. In the pack rafts that Matt showed us on the screen, you might have noticed that the rucksack is just strapped to the front of the boat. Now that's pretty old school primitive pack rafting. And if you're doing that, then basically you need to have your gear all stored in multiple dry bags. So you tend to run a system inside your rucksack where you'll have everything in a number of different reasonably trustworthy dry bags. And those, you can get quite thick, heavy duty ones, you can get lightweight ones. If you're going to strap the rucksack to the bow of your boat, then you probably want to double dry bag it. I tend to put things in a lightweight sil nylon dry bag, one of the Sea to Summit products, and then inside another bigger, slightly more heavy duty dry bag. So it's double dry bag, and then inside a reasonably watertight rucksack. There's some pretty good rucksacks out there now that have a roll top dry bag type of closure. And that works pretty effectively. But also what we might be able to put some footage or images up later if Matt's able to get them, maybe from our recent Franklin River trip. The packraft manufacturers now have a system where they have an airtight and watertight zip in the stern, and you can actually get your gear inside the air compartments of the packraft. And unless your packraft is ripped or burst or punctured, then your gear is going to stay bone dry inside the tubes of the packraft itself. Have you got one of those pictures you could share, Matt?
You've seen the first one of you getting in a boat.
Yeah. So that's old school. That's not really how we travel anymore. These pictures that Matt's sharing now are from about 10 years or so ago.
That is the Jane.
That's the Jane. Yep.
What a magnificent river.
Oh, my goodness, what a place. I guess for a lot of the audience, I don't think they might understand just how few people alive have ever seen these places and possibly will ever get to, because of the extreme amount of skill and physical endurance it takes to get into these places. But At the same time, there's a lot of principles that I think people can take away from tonight in terms of, by the time we get to the end, how to manage your equipment and extreme sort of conditions and you know, the choices you make, how to lighten your load. And I guess for me, John and Matt, and having done a lot of rafting myself, there's a real trade-off between the level of how well waterproof your gear is and also how accessible it is in order to be able to get it out and capture something in the moment. And that to me is a constant dance in this kind of environment. Love to hear your thoughts about how you get around that.
Well, the brand of boat that I use, Paul, is the Alpaca brand. And the Alpaca company in recent years have developed a watertight bow bag. So the way I run now on any substantial river is I run almost all of my gear stored internally inside the tubes of the raft. And I have that dry bag in case of a rupture of the boat, but those are pretty rare anyway. And then on the bow, on the deck of the boat, we have a bag in which you can put a pretty decent sized camera and accessories. And those bags are like waterproof with a tie zip that is easily openable. And oh, there we go. We've got a fox on the screen.
Yeah, I haven't seen that, John. Like I'm used to slightly bigger rafts where I sort of fine tune and I have all my gear tucked away, and each day I choose like one lens and one body that I want access to, and I have it in a small pelly case that's very accessible. But it's not big enough to fit any more gear than that, and so it's kind of like this decision, kind of like Matt says, for longer trips.
Yeah, the
you've got to really think about the kind of train you're going through, and just choose the one, the one combo that's going to be accessible. So yeah, I'll be keen to see those. I always feel a bit nervous relying on one singular waterproofing system.
Yeah, if Matt,
that's a nerve.
Are you able to get up on the screen, Matt, one of the pictures of, say, an Alpaca yak with internal storage with the bow bag on?
Yes, I was just failing to do that just then. Hang on a sec. I thought I had that set up ready to go.
Yeah, it's a constant thing, you know, whether you're bushwalking or rafting and being around the water more intensely, but finding a way to waterproof your equipment and still be able to access it in difficult conditions is a bit of a skill and worth a lot of thought. And you can make some mistakes and find out the hard way, as I'm sure we all have many times over.
Absolutely.
And getting the kind of wisdom and experience of you guys to help us avoid and help other people avoid a few traps would be pretty handy, I think.
Another thing that I do, Paul, is although, I mean, I pick and choose my camera gear, I also have a Sony Alpha system similar to Matt's, which I sometimes take if I think I can justify the weight of it. But on trips where I'm at my limit of what I can carry, then I leave that at home and I have a small Nikon waterproof point and shoot that I can lark's foot onto my PFD. So it's permanently tucked inside my PFD. And then, as you're actually shooting white water halfway down a rapid, you can just grab it out, bang away on it and put it back. Now, of course, the quality of the images is not going to give us the resolution and the contrastiness and the sharpness of a full system, but they're not bad for action shots in particular.
Yeah, I've done the same, John. I've tried the Olympus Tough 4 and 5, and I have them on a lark's foot, but I have a floating kind of brightly coloured yellow kind of what's it called? It's part of the strap that enables the camera to float. Yeah, cool. So if you drop it in the water, you can see it and potentially grab it. And secondly, it's fully waterproof down to a few meters. So that's the sacrifice of quality versus accessibility. And same here, I have it literally in my PDF pocket, and I know I can get out and shoot within about 2 seconds, because a lot of the most fun action shots are in the moment and while things are all happening. And particularly if you're with a team of people or a group of people, some of which aren't photographers, which I've done plenty of times, they don't have the patience for you to stop and all get all your gear out. So it's a great compromise to have one of those as well.
What have you got here, Matt?
I've completely failed to find the actual shot I wanted to find, but you can see a couple of the boats on the screen there. But otherwise, I just keep finding shots on the river. So maybe, I don't know if you can see your zip on your boat there.
Please. Yep.
Ah, I see. Yeah, right.
So that black line on the back of that boat is a zip. And inside that is the dry bag. So you can see John has a lot less on his boat there. He's got a bow bag on the front, which is your day stuff, and everything else is inside it. So the much lower center of gravity, much more stable ride on a setup like that. Whereas the boat that I'm in, it does have internal storage, but my son in the front boat here, he's got a light, first time on riverboat, so I still had to have gear on the outside of my boat.
Very good.
Yes,
for those of us that are a bit more land-based, which I assume is most that are watching, it's always a constant battle when you're bushwalking. You might be carrying a large rucksack on your back, to be that accessibility thing about how to have your camera ready, ready to go, and or how to keep it dry. I'm very basic, and I'm hoping to change the way I do it, but I tend to have my camera tucked away for most of a bushwalk, and I tend to do photography at the camp, or where I've camped at the start of the day. Then I'll pack up for the day and then walk somewhere, and then unless there's something very special, I don't generally tend to get my camera out until I get to my destination, and then I go off exploring at the destination. But I know Luke has a much better system than what I use. Do you want to talk about your aqua bag system?
Yeah, I'll just, I've got a picture up here at the moment. I'll just share my screen here. Hopefully you can just see this one here. So this is me in front of on the walk into the Western Arthur range. You can see the beautiful jagged mountain aquapack on my front here, and so obviously I've got my in your main rucksack, and you want to take a picture every time you're having to heave off this 20 to 30 kilo bag onto the ground, and you end up feeling very you're basically disincentivized for taking pictures, and you don't really want that. So this is just a very, very basic sort of, I guess it's like a nylon exterior, plastic lined, very, very rugged, and has padding in there, and it's basically just a sleeve, a pouch that you can fit your camera and a camera with a lens attached plus another lens. So I've been using that for many years. This would have been taken quite a few years ago now, and so and I haven't really been able to find something personally that I can anything better than that, but I'm always looking. But yeah, it's called Aquapack Stormproof DSLR pouch. So that's what I've been using, and recently got another one just to replace. But yeah, so that's the solution that I've come up with. But I'm not saying that's necessarily the best way, but it's definitely what I've found that works really well.
Yeah, from what I've seen, it's a good solution. So yeah, Matt, you've gone and grabbed something, haven't you?
Yeah. So is that, Luke, was that around your neck or slung off your harness?
Yeah, it's sort of there's a strap that goes around your neck, and then there's also one that clips around your waist as well. So I mean, it can wear into your neck a little bit. My friend Dylan Toe has one, and he actually clips his to the front of his straps here, so that it's not actually on, like, rubbing against his body. But I don't actually find that too much of an issue. Sometimes it might cut in a little bit. It's like wearing a seatbelt sort of thing, but yeah, it's not too bad.
I've migrated a bit, Nick, through the years. Obviously, large format was always in the pack, and it was a full stop and slow setup to get everything out. I'm currently using one of these Ortlieb roll top sealed bags, and I sort of shove one lens down in the bottom and then the camera on top, and I usually have a second pack with my neutral density filters on the outside to it. I've tended now to use my phone a whole lot more for mostly record shots in the trip, and sometimes even for other shots. So I actually tend to leave mine in my pack and or on the front of a boat for a river trip for SLR, and just get it out for the shots that I really want. And that sometimes means that I end up with a great shot that I wish I'd taken on a DSLR. But then again, if it's better than not having the shot at all, because you might not have, if you're a bit cold, a bit tired, you might not bother getting it out. As I've got down to smaller gear, and I think you can see my camera here now, so that's the little Leica lens on the front. And
forward a bit, Matt. Just
that's sorry. Oh yeah, it's coming with my head, I think. That's the voice thing about these backdrops. That's a Canon lens next to it here, so it's quite a tiny little lens, really. I'll put it in my hand just to kind of give you a feeling. So with it, can you sort of see that?
Yep.
So that's my single only camera lens now, and I can't remember what it weighs, but it's quite light. With that sort of kit, it's fairly light around your neck, but even then I've tended to move to leave it in my pack most of the time. And if I break out the SLR, I tend to break out the tripod to go with it. I don't, it's sort of become that's the heavy, okay, I'm going to stop now, put some effort into photos. John's going to have to put a jumper on to put up with this. The rest will be sort of quick point and shoots. And on a river, if you have to get out of the water, for instance, it's a whole extra bit of effort. So if you can take your nice shot that's more of a part of the story on the water, just pulling something out of your life vest pocket or pulling something out of your raincoat pocket, you can get some great shots that tell the story that you're never really going to enlarge to a post or anything else, but they're there. And I think now that a lot of our medium is social media, those shots, well, it's what everyone's taking, isn't it? And they're all valuable record shots of where you are, and they're showing beautiful places and what you can do there. So I don't tend to walk with my gear out.
Like phones these days, you can get really good batteries that can charge them up like 5 times over. They don't weigh too much, and you can drop them in the river and pull them out again. The latest iPhones in particular, and they shoot 12 meg and HD video. So it's sort of, I hate to admit it, but they're a bit more functional than they used to be on a trip like this. And Luke's a bit of a master at managing his different phones for different reasons. And being really honest, that the majority of photographs that tell a story are probably, it isn't necessarily advantageous to have them on a high resolution system because they're only ever going to be seen on a screen.
Can I just jump in there? Sorry, Paul.
Yeah. I'll follow on what I was going to say after you, John.
Sorry, I was just going to go back to Matt's point about where he puts his camera in that waterproof case. And I'm just going to say about the trips that Matt does. We love tracks, Matt and I, but we hardly ever get to use them because often the places that we want to go don't happen to have tracks. And so we end up spending an enormous proportion of our time bashing through horrendous scrub. And in those environments, on those days when there's any scrub involved, we don't have anything hanging outside our rucksack or off ourselves. Absolutely every single object that we are carrying is safely tucked deep inside the covers of our rucksacks. And so it just comes, if we see a scene we want to photograph, we just have to stop, unload our rucksacks, get the camera out and do it all from scratch on those situations.
I must say it's funny watching some of your videos and seeing the condition of your shirts and things rapidly deteriorate over time. Towards at the end, they're just tatters basically that's left. But yeah, I can you can certainly understand how that happens given how thick the bush can get. So
yeah, for people that don't know, Tasmania is famous in bushwalking circles in Australia as being easily one of the more extreme places, particularly with off-track bushwalking. It's quite notorious if you don't sort of know what you're doing to end up in some really difficult situations where your capacity to move through it is really limited and incredibly slow. And as John said, if you've got any bits and pieces hanging out, it could, you get stuck on it and tagged, and it slows down your progress even more. Oh, there you go. We've got cutting grass, and you've got horizontal, which is this. How would you describe horizontal? Goodness me.
oh
Yeah.
oh dear.
Where's the line, Matt?
We must have missed the track place.
Yeah.
I'm assuming, and some days like that, moving just a few hundred meters can take hours when you're going through some stuff that's that thick.
Yes, we've had some pretty tough days, but I'm lucky that I get to go with Matt. Matt is the strongest I've seen in the scrub. I've spent a lot of time in scrub with a lot of people, and Matt's just awesome. He just throws himself at it like a bulldozer. Doesn't do any damage. He's not there to damage the environment, but he can push his way through it, and then I can sneakily follow.
What's your technique, Matt?
Well, it's how I got my job. So I don't know how many of you read Trouble. I had trouble getting to Solar Salou, but there's a line out of that which says, "This is called teamwork. I furnish the brains, you furnish the muscles, the aches and the pains." So what John needed back when I was 16 was someone to get him and his pack to these rivers and these other mountains. And so I had a bit of reputation for doing that. At the time, I would get my old heavy pack and throw it in front of me. And now it's a sort of push and pull and swear and curse and try to get your weight on top of it, as always seems to be the technique. I'm not as strong now, so I need to find another young bloke to do the job for both of us now, I think.
That's it, yeah. What do you reckon's the worst scrub we've seen, Matt?
The Naff Ridge on the side of the Propsting Range, which I've probably got a photo of in a second, but once many years ago, a bloke I used to walk with, Kent Lillico, who sort of, mentored me through my early days in bushwalking. I think I've got a photo. Some of you probably know Kent, and I've got a photo. He and I went to the went to the Folded Range in winter and traversed along the Folded Range. There's Kent on the left there, and Kent took me along the Western Arthurs and along the Folded Range here out towards Cinder Hill. We crossed over to the White Monolith Range, and this valley you can see here was similar to the other side. We tried to cross that and only got to the bottom of it in a day, and then in the middle of winter climbed up the other side. So sort of 3 kilometres in a day. And the range that John was referring to, Naff, what we call Naff Ridge, and Naff was stood for needs a fire, and I think we added a second F to it to get through that area.
That's what Dan Bruin's just saying on YouTube. That's exactly what it has an extra F.
I mean, I'm loving this. I mean, I've been a guide for 17 years in Tasmania, and I've never even heard of half of these ranges that you're talking about. And I love it.
Right. This photo you can see now is in the central mountain is a mountain called Mount Gaffney, and the bay on the left is Mulcahy Bay. And just under, can you see my cursor there?
Yes.
Yeah.
The cursor is on Low Rocky Point. You'll know where that is. That used to be the sort of the weather. The weather at Low Rocky Point was a feature of Mike Pook's weather forecasts way back. To get from here going westwards to the Propsting Range, which is that thing there, we had to cross onto this ridge, and getting from that ridge down the other side was nearly a full day's work, and we were totally exhausted getting there. But then crossing valleys like this is where you find a lot of good stuff. But I think you could see from the scrub I showed you before, and the whale, with nothing hanging on the outsides of our pack or anything else, that you have to have your gear contained. You can't have stuff hanging off the outside. You can't even have your tripod on the outside. I think, John, you've lost a tripod completely, and I've certainly broken some. Is that true?
I never lost a set of legs, but I have lost that really nice Acrotech head I had. I lost that.
Right.
So,
I have to admit, I've lost the padding off the side of my tripod legs. Have gotten all stripped off from that sort of stuff as well. And
yeah, I had an Acrotech head fall off my tripod as well. It's nothing against Acrotech. It would have happened to any head. Acrotech are wonderful heads, but I realised very quickly after I lost it that I'd lost it, and I was able to go back and find it. So that was very lucky. But been pulled by the scrub.
What size packs do you need to be able to fit a pack raft inside it as well?
Well, this old yellow pack that Matt's got on the screen now, we don't use those anymore, but they were all right for their era. But these days, Matt and I are both using hyperlight mountain gear rucksacks from Maine, USA, in 2 different sizes. Mine's a 70 litre and Matt's is about an 80, 85 litre, would you say, Matt?
I'm not sure. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. And I restrict myself to the 70 litre size, knowing that if I can't get it into that, and there's an option to strap an extra dry bag to the top if I really have to, that's pretty much the limit of what I can sensibly carry these days for long journeys. And I've successfully managed to use that 70 litre hyperlight rucksack for trips of up to 2 weeks of food and full mountaineering gear and full pack rafting kit. And that's pretty much the limit. That's, making careful choices of absolutely everything, careful choices of the food, careful choices of the equipment to minimize weight and volume to get it into that capacity.
I guess this is a good point to say that the amount of planning that goes into these very remote trips is very high, and the amount of experience that you and Matt have is very high, and it's not something that you have right at the beginning. What advice, as I guess, there's such experience that you have, John, and your experience in teaching outdoor education, what sort of advice would you have to someone who's into photography? They like the idea of going somewhere that's going to take them out for a night, so they're going to have to buy some gear and grab a tent. Not necessarily in Tasmania, I suppose, but Tasmania, obviously, you've got to think a bit more about the weather. But what advice would you have to someone who's just thinking, right, I'm into photography, there's a place I'd love to go, but I'm going to have to camp overnight or camp for a couple of nights to get there? Well, what would you say?
That's a good idea. He's trying to embarrass me now. I was hurting then. I was really sore that day.
Okay, so explain the bush bashing gloves, because people will be wondering why you were.
It's the most important bit of kit, isn't it?
Oh yeah. No, that day I was in a lot of pain. In our day when we started, Nick, there were a network of clubs that were really great places for people to join and build their experience incrementally. Start off doing day walks with the other members, then progress to easy overnighters, and then gradually work their way up. Now, since the era of social media is upon us, people don't use clubs so much, but they do still exist. There's a thriving Hobart Walking Club. There's a thriving Launceston Walking Club. There are clubs all over Australia, which are great starting points that people can reach out to and join and begin an incremental program of developing their skills and experience in a sensible trajectory. But if people are averse to joining clubs, then there are a lot of really great networks on social media where really good things have been happening. Like, for example, I curate a pack rafting in Tasmania Facebook group with my friend Mark Oates from Hobart. We jointly run that. And we've got a lot of members now who share their expertise with each other, and it's a great venue for people to ask questions and get advice and learn how to gear themselves up. So these kind of Facebook pages and groups exist for bushwalking in a number of different ways. But the key is whatever method people choose, they must do it incrementally. You just can't just suddenly start doing really big, serious off-track multi-day trips. You've got to begin with humility, with something that's pretty straightforward, and then gradually build your ambitions.
And why is that, John? What is it? What are the dangers of jumping too quickly into it?
Well, if you obviously, of course, there are serious risks of injury and environmental illnesses like hypothermia and so on that people can suffer and can ultimately die from if they have misadventures. But I think what's even more important is that if people go out and demoralize themselves by tackling something that's too hard too soon, then they're going to turn themselves off from the activity. So even from a simplistic point of view of trying to establish good lifetime habits and getting into a broader set of experiences that they can enjoy, they'll rapidly turn themselves off if they bite off too much too soon. So the dangers, as you've intimated, of course, there are numerous dangers in the outdoors. There are snakes that can bite you. There are river crossings that can cause you trouble. There are places where the navigation becomes quite challenging. And we know we've lost people who haven't been that far off track, never to be seen again. I mean, those are the ultimate dangers. But I think, more importantly is instilling that message of trying to get people to enjoy their interaction with the environment in a way that's not going to put them off by tackling too much too soon.
Yeah, thanks for that, John. And just for those watching, I mean, it's quite obvious that your form of bushwalking that you're so experienced at is quite extreme. Tasmania is a very extreme place to go bushwalking off track, particularly in the southwest. So if you're getting into bushwalking, then you're probably hearing some horror stories now about scrub and all that. But quite frankly, there are lots of great tracks out there, and that's the way to start. You certainly don't start by just plunging into the scrub. And the walking clubs are a great idea. I mean, I haven't been a member of the walking clubs, but I certainly know lots and lots of people who have, and they're very, very active. The ones in Tasmania have, pre-coronavirus and hopefully post-coronavirus have many walks. They have several walks a week for the beginners through to the more advanced. Those that just go walking in the suburbs and the hills around Launceston and Hobart, and then the weekend walks will take a bit further afield to the expeditions of 7 days for the more experienced. So that's definitely a way to get into it. And I guess, as you said, John, the social media and internet forums are very, very active and full of advice, and there's so much advice you could be reading for years. I think I've found that the best way to I mean, there's so much advice and some of it's conflicting, and I think the best way is to just build that experience by doing it, rather than try and get advice for something that is a bit more difficult if you've never done it before. Any bushwalk can turn very sour very quickly, but if you start off with nice easy tracks that are well marked and with other people, that's a great start. And there are lots of safety bits of gear these days that it's important for the group that you're with to have. I mean, maps, you can get them electronically on devices now, GPS devices which can pinpoint exactly where you are, and of course PLBs or personal locator beacons, which are recommended by the emergency services to carry, particularly if you're doing any overnight walks or even day walks. I mean, I carry one if I go only for a couple of hours, because some of the time I'll be in a valley where I can't get mobile phone reception, and I might need to pull the pin, when I've broken my leg somewhere. So that stuff you can hire, you can buy incrementally, you can do walks without that gear to start with, so long as you're not doing too much that's too far away from services, and just get yourself into it. Now, moving on, I guess we have
got a few questions.
I'm just touching on what you were saying.
I've got some questions.
Yeah, there was a good question about looking at long-term weather forecasts and understanding, having a plan B if the forecast isn't looking like it's going to be conducive to the original plan.
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. Did you want to tackle that one, Matt? Or
you start.
Okay, cool. Matt and I will often look closely at the weather in the lead up to our trips, but then of course, once we've committed to going, there's not much that we can do about the trip once we're in the field. And with the duration of some of our trips, the forecast can change, while we're underway. And so we've basically over time kind of developed the self-discipline to just deal with whatever the weather is that we get to a certain extent, which often isn't particularly comfortable or pleasant, but you get the rough with the smooth. But what is important, particularly when people are developing their levels of skill, is to look for escape routes on your trip. If you're looking at a trip to take you through a certain region, you're looking at following a track, then it's worth paying attention to where are the obvious lines from which you can exit at short notice. And usually for most regions, there will be some kind of potential escape routes that you can just chalk up in the back of your mind as options to shorten and get out if you need to. It's also really good on any route to be able to build into your plan sufficient time to allow a lay day if necessary for bad weather. If you have to sit out a period of bad weather in a tent, it's great to not have the pressure of needing to maintain momentum so that you can afford to be able to sit out any bad weather.
I think that's, and we practice that at multiple levels, don't we, John? I think we wouldn't do a 7 or 8 day trip without 3 days spare food. Well, I wouldn't. I mean, you might carry a lot less spare than me, but yeah, a couple of great.
One day,
but
1 day spare food.
Even then, when we're doing a remote wilderness river, we line up each rapid for exit points. So we won't do a drop that we might do on closer to home on a day trip where there's lots of help around if we're worried about if we can't see a safe exit point below that rapid. So we're doing it for every step along the river. If the river comes up and the next bit's a big gorge, we might not do it, or we might walk around it. And so it goes from planning the whole trip to having spare time and no pressure and what are your exit points to planning down to the next sort of thing in front of you.
I might just
mention a particular source where you get your weather forecasting from. Is it just Bureau of Meteorology or any apps or anything that you'd recommend?
Yeah, I've probably got 12 weather apps on my phone. But my favourite one is Windy.
Yeah, that's great.
I love Windy, but in order to be able to use Windy really well, you actually need to have a bit of understanding of weather patterns to be able to interpret the charts for yourself, rather than to have some other expert synthesize it down to a 10-word phrase. So you really, you do need to have a bit more advanced knowledge, but your Windy's the go for me.
Yeah, that's a really good one, Windy. It's worth mentioning, and my own experience has given me this, and a lot of bushwalking experience is by stuffing up. You stuff something up and you learn from it, and then you try not to repeat that same problem. Now, one of the things that can lead to you stuffing up is bloody mindedness and having a destination in mind and trying to get there no matter what the circumstances. And I have a story that I tell lots of people, and I won't do the full details here because it's a long story, but I got myself into serious trouble in the walls of Jerusalem trying to get to a particular area. This is when I was quite young, and I was only really, it was the first trip I'd done overnight with getting into photography seriously. And there were places I really wanted to go. My enthusiasm for photography got the better of me, and I ran into some trouble in some deep snow, and I was in big trouble, and it could have ended very badly. And the reason I got myself into big trouble was I could see what the problem was, and after a short period trying to tackle the problem, I could see that it was going to be a serious ongoing problem, but I still pursued it because I wanted to get to a particular place. And it was just being stupid and stubborn that led me into serious trouble. And so you have to have the presence of mind to stop and think and say, right, this is going to get me into trouble. I need to turn around now, or I need to stop now and put my tent up to save my life because it's getting cold, or there's no way I'm going to get there, so I just need to accept that. If there's an obstacle in the way, have a think about just how serious it could be, and don't do things that are stupid just for the sake of it. It'll be there next time. You can come back next year and get a photo from there, or you can just wait out a day for the conditions to ease and you'll be able to get there fine. I mean, if I just waited for the snow to freeze overnight, which it did that night, it froze solid, and I was able to walk back out from where I got stuck with no problems whatsoever because the snow was frozen solid, then, you know, I could have had a much nicer trip and not one that was quite as miserable, and still been safe. But because of my stubbornness, I got myself into trouble. So it's really worth remembering that no destination, no photo is worth an injury or worth your life or getting into trouble. So yeah, just thought I'd put that out there for those that are getting into it. Photography can be, you can get very enthusiastic and you can look forward to, I'm going somewhere, and it might be that you don't have leave from work for 6 months and you're going, right, I'm going to go to this place and it's going to be wonderful and I've got this photo in mind. And when it comes to the time that you know, the small window of opportunity you have to take that trip, and the weather is against you, it can be disappointing. But you sometimes just have to say, right, I'm just not capable, or I don't have the gear to get to a certain place and to turn around.
And sometimes too, when you change your plans, something better can happen. Like a similar thing happened to me, I think it was last year when I was in Walls of Jerusalem in winter, and we were hoping to stay another night, but there was a decent snowfall coming in, and I was a bit concerned that if we stayed the night, then the track might get snowed over and it would make it very hard to navigate our way out. And so we ended up going to hiking out and going to Cradle Mountain. And because it snowed overnight, the next morning we went at sunrise and we actually had the whole park to ourselves, covered in snow, and they closed the gate because you couldn't access the road because of the snow. So we had Cradle all to ourselves with the snow, which is quite nice. So you never know what positives can come out of changing your plans as well.
That's
so
good point, Luke. And in a similar vein, if I can relate to, I'm not sure who asked the question originally, but in a similar vein, for that fallback position, a plan B, last year with my outdoor leadership class, so this is a class of grade 11 and 12 students, my students and I had planned a trip to Frenchman's Cap, and we went through the process of formally applying for a parks permit to also do a walk to the Tasman Peninsula as a plan B in case of inclement weather at Frenchman's Cap. So we laid out a double plan right from the start. We had our Frenchman's Cap permit, and we had our, this is an educational exemption, if you like, and we also had one for the Tasman Peninsula in case Frenchman's was no good. And it just so happened that that was the week that that massive snow dump came, and there were several people in all kinds of trouble on the overland track. That was when we'd planned to go to Frenchman's Cap, but we had our plan B ready to unroll. So that's what you've just identified with your plan B of moving destination, is a really good thing to have, particularly if you're looking at tracked routes. If you're looking at a tracked route, there are many of them. So you can lay out an alternative to lower altitude on the eastern side of the states, usually going to have less weather than the western side. There are forethought can help a lot to adjust your plans and have a good experience.
Yeah, well said, John. I think we might move on to Matt. You've got a few bits and pieces to show us. Did you want to show us some of your photography and videos in whatever order that you're after, or that you can?
Yeah, look, it nearly came off before when we were talking about starting out, and I started out doing a lot of stuff with the Launceston Walking Club, and they mentored me for many years, taught me lots of stuff, got me in with a lot of bushwalkers, and so I'm just trying to share the screen while I'm talking here. But through that, I also got involved in the photography side through their Do You Know Tasmania slideshows, and that was back then on 35mm slides, and I shared the wrong thing, but that's all right. 35mm slides, and we'd do them every couple of years, and we'd fill the local theatre here with people, and they'd come to see slideshows of bits of Tasmania people wouldn't see. But later on, there was a whole lot of people who shot films way back in the 60s and 70s, and this is on Maxwell Island, and went to places which now no longer operate the same way. And so these are historic films that have become part of history, and we don't walk like this anymore. We don't see that. This is the lighthouse keeper on Maxwell Island when the light was actually still burning whatever solid fuel they were burning. And so I got involved in a project where Ian Ross got these films digitized, and we had to reconnect all the sound to all of them. And I did a lot of that work there, and looking at some of these films and history and watching this sort of thing, like the light being lit on Matt Syker and the flame going up, and then he puts a match in at the end and suddenly it lit up, and getting onto the Tasman Light by the basket and going up the car on the side of these things. You suddenly appreciate where bushwalking has come from in this state, where photography has come from, what people used to have to do, and some of sort of the adventures of your forebears in that regard. So I found these films and work fascinating, and things to look at. And some of them are funny films, some of them are historic films. And Norton Harvey, who shot a lot of this, he's 92 or 94 now. He's still, well, I'm still doing this at the moment because I haven't quite finished the last few that he really wants to see. This is the old wooden railway going down the side of Maxwell Island. So a lot of fascinating history getting involved in the walking clubs, and they've sort of served me well for years. And imagine if that cable snapped on this thing. I don't know. Most of these wouldn't be there anymore. You've been to Tasman Island, Nick? Is the tramway still there?
I haven't been to Tasman Island, but I have seen it from the Tasman Peninsula, and it's and the blade and the haulage is still there. I don't know if it's in action at the moment or not, but they've just rebuilt the landing there, which was damaged after the storms of 2016, June 2016. They were badly damaged.
Will be free dropped from a low-flying aircraft on Tasmania's southwest coast to traverse the almost unknown coast between Port Davey and Macquarie Harbour. With the weather favourable on December the 27th, the party prepares to leave Launceston Airport. A stopover is planned at Lake Pedder, where several club members who are taking advantage of the flight will be left. Lake Pedder comes into view with its unique, hard quartzite beach. This beach forms a natural airstrip which would be the envy of many an airport.
So I've cut and clipped bits out of some of these just for the...
Few people, even Tasmanians, realise that this magnificent area is a declared national park. It provides an example of nature's architecture at its best, and for years has been known as the jewel of the southwest. After final farewells, the party flies southward. The Franklin Range lies to the west as height is gained on the final hop. Mountain vistas remind us of walks done and those yet to come. Bathurst Harbour, Bathurst Channel and Port Davey lie to the west. Height is lost as the approach is made to Denny King's airstrip at Melaleuca Inlet. Waiting here are 5 members to join the party who've already walked along the south coast track from Catamaran. The night is spent in the Charles King Memorial Hut, which Denny King provided for bushwalkers as a memorial to his father. Wood is scarce around the King's homestead, and in return for carrying walkers, it's long been the custom to help provide a winter supply of firewood. Willing helpers soon moved nearly 4 tons of wood to the water's edge. When the party embarks on Denny's boat, it's felt that the trip is now really underway. A few hours of this and the rigours of the walking to come is forgotten. Here, Bathurst Harbour is virtually landlocked, but as the boat heads seaward, it opens into Port Davey proper. Heading northwest, Port Davey is crossed to its northern side, where a landing will be made in a small inlet known as Bond Bay.
Fantastic.
That's fantastic. What a great project, Matt.
Yeah, so so I'm trying to stop the movie now. So I think there's all sorts of history to bushwalking and photography here, which is just amazing. And it's at the time, I'm almost thinking now, some of my photos, you're taking another photo. The best stuff is going to be singular and never repeated, and we're losing some of these areas, and we lost some of them now. And the different equipment and the stories we're doing and how we're transporting our stuff, and it's all changing. So I'm sort of more and more aware of trying to make sure that my best stuff is out for people to see, and well, for my children to go, oh, look at that, that's interesting. We don't have that kit now because it's all changing.
So if people didn't know, one of the reasons we delayed our show one day once was because they had an incredible night in celebration of Lake Pedder, which was actually one of the earlier conservation campaigns that wasn't successful. And even though it was potentially declared to be a national park, they flooded it anyway, and it literally is 15 meters underwater, Matt?
I don't even think it's even that. Is it even that deep?
It's about
so there's a push to actually have the valley drained and for it to be restored, because it's a very rare alpine quartzite lake of incredible beauty, beautifully documented by Lagos Johannes and a few others. And so that footage that Matt showed was actually far beyond existing for about almost 50 years now, and 45 years or so. And it really is a very unique and irreplaceable sort of content. And I guess our role as photographers is, over large period of times, will be increasingly so as the wild areas of the world keep shrinking.
Absolutely. What else you got there, Matt?
I don't have a whole lot more prepared as videos. I've got one more I'll just show, which would be the sort of perfect conditions for us to be out. Just let me get that going.
Oh.
This is sort of a set of perfect conditions I had a year or so ago. Can you see that one?
Yep,
Yes.
beautiful.
Yeah, so you just imagine lining up your photos when this starts happening, when this sort of weather's going on. And I was camped down the valley when this cloud started and shot up here as fast as I could. Just moved to another mountain, but similar conditions. And it's windy. You need to weight down your tripod and try to keep still so it doesn't move. You can see here the image stabilizing is working overtime in the wind, but it's just perfect conditions and light to get lots of good photos. And I was recording movies as well when all this was happening, but it's just got more and more magical.
Wow, beautiful. So where's this, Matt?
This is Perhams Bluff in the Pelion, so sort of extending westwards from Mount Ossa towards Pine Forest Moor, and the high circuit of the big high mountains there. And that's the main Perhams Bluff summit in the middle of the shot there. And I went to the closest high point I could get to from where I was camped. That's
for those not familiar, it's west of the Overland Track.
Yeah.
Just also addressing a question here as well, but what do you guys do in terms of keeping your batteries going? Do you take a lot of batteries to keep your cameras going, or just try and limit the amount of shots you take? I see you've got video and time lapse, so that must really chew up some battery.
I'm happy to talk about this one if you like, Matt.
Yeah, go for it.
Last year I was lucky enough to have some long service leave, and I planned 2 expeditions in Peru, one river expedition in the Amazon jungle and another mountain expedition in the Andes. And I decided that I needed to really strengthen my battery capacity for both of those expeditions. So I did a lot of research, and I found in the end a really good system with basically a battery pack that you can get. There are plenty of those available to store energy, and a small folding solar panel that is really light. They're not very heavy at all. And so you can charge directly from the small solar panel that can unfold. You can strap it to the top of your rucksack if you're in open country. Obviously hopeless in scrub, but in open country you can unfold solar panel with pretty good capacity. And I think with both of those together, the battery pack and the solar panel, there was sufficient in that to charge. I think I had about 8 rechargeable devices. I had about 3 batteries for my Sony Alpha. I had my InReach, my Garmin InReach satellite communication device, rechargeable head torch. All of my mapping, by the way, for that particular pair of expeditions, the Peruvian maps aren't particularly wonderful. So I made a decision to go purely with electronic maps for both of those expeditions. The best electronic maps that I could get, which included satellite imagery, loaded onto my smartphone. You can almost see it there in the screen, but basically on an Apple iPhone, that was my primary navigation device for both of those off-route jungle and mountain expeditions. So yeah, there are devices out there. You need to work out how much capacity you need. Like if I was doing a mountain trip in Tasmania, I wouldn't take both the solar panel and the battery pack, but the battery pack gives you plenty of capacity for up to a week with a load of rechargeable devices.
I agree with that. When on my longer trips, I think sort of 7 or 8 days, I normally use a 20,000 milliamp hour battery block, and that normally does the job. I've found solar can be, obviously with Tassie conditions, a little bit patchy here and there, unless you know that there's going to be some really clear days. Mightn't be worth carrying that extra weight, but yeah, I'd certainly find that's enough. And the question also was going into the Sony's battery life as well, which is a topic that basically the older Sony cameras did have much smaller batteries, and so you'd have to go through quite a lot of batteries. But in the generation 3 and generation 4 of the Sony cameras, they've actually increased the battery capacity by quite a lot, so they actually match now what DSLRs are capable of. And so you'll find that the battery life issue is no longer, but unfortunately Sony still has a reputation for having poor battery life. Don't know what generation you guys are using, John and Matt, but yeah, certainly with the A7 III or A7R 3 and A7R 4, it's much better battery life now too.
Yeah, mine's the A7 III, and I found I only have the one Sony battery, and I bought 2 aftermarket batteries, and I did a lot of research about those because some of them are considered pretty dodgy. But the 2 aftermarket batteries that I bought have really good capacity, and I find that if I'm just sensible with how much viewing I do of my images on the back screen afterwards, if I don't do much of that, then the batteries last really fine. And
Yep.
on my Peruvian trip, and also last year's trip to Nepal, I did a fair bit of astrophotography, a lot of night photography, and even with a lot of extended exposure astrophotography, no problems with my battery life. Rotating 3 batteries and a little portable charger, and I think my battery pack was 2800 milliamp, whatever they are, whatever the units are.
There's a quick question just from Rosie for you, John, about that solar panel and battery pack that you took with you to Peru. Do you know what the name of those are off the top of your head?
No, but I'll get them. I'll see if I can get them up. I'll locate them through Rosie. I'll see what I can do.
Awesome.
When I can, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think the Sonys were that bad, even the Gen 1. And this is a picture in Alaska. This was, I think, we were out in the wilderness for 14 days then, and I didn't have any other battery packs there. I just took 3 Sony batteries.
Screen, unfortunately.
Not working?
Don't know what
Just
you
got
did
the
last
white
time.
screen.
Yeah.
Oh, don't you love that when that happens? I took 3 Sony batteries, and I shot thousands of photos. And I think in this trip it really wasn't an issue. I was shooting because in Alaska in summer there is no dark time, so you can just keep shooting. You don't have to even go to sleep. So I got plenty of battery life out of it, not recharging anything else. So I think the Sony ones were given a rap. I think time-lapse chews through it, and astrophotography, leaving long exposures, that definitely melts them down. But I don't think I don't think the Sony was any worse than my Canon 5D.
Do you have do you have some of your other photography to show us, Matt, while we're waiting for John there? It'd be really great to see some of your work.
Any areas or?
Tasmania.
Tasmania, yeah.
Just, you know, Franklin, you know, the Franklin River and your mountain stuff. Anything you've got there.
Yeah. I was just trying to
pull up would be lovely to see. I mean, your background, your Zoom background is just a magnificent photo of some myrtles in the mist. And this is good.
So this is on the winter solstice last year. I summit Camp Barn Bluff here, and got misty, cold conditions, and a beautiful little spot, and moving along the top there, that's Lake Will down there. So this just a nice one-nighter up high in the snow. It was tricky sort of snow because it wasn't quite enough of it to sort of trust, so you'd keep sliding off the rock and set up the top.
It's a pretty ambitious place to camp there, mate.
Yeah. Well, you know, shortest day of the year was a nice long restful night without interruption. Good sunrise the next morning. So this is classic going for photography, isn't it? You go there, you set up, you get there with plenty of time, you line up what you're going to look for, and and then you might get lucky with the weather and it all comes together or not.
It's beautiful, mate. I love the natural style that you present, and always been a big admirer, and it's great to see these pictures now. What else have you got there, mate?
Summit of Mount Olympus. So this is again last year. I've been slowly working through summit camps and camping up high just to get that nice light at the end of the day, and I've sort of, you know, rivers with John in the summer, and then the summits in autumn and winter. This is looking down towards Frenchman's Cap and down there, and Lake Petrarch and the Cuvier Valley in the evening there. And
those that are keen to see more of this too, Matt's got an amazing video on his YouTube of this trip that he did up to the summit of Mount Olympus, and there's some absolutely staggeringly beautiful shots in there.
This lake down in here is meant to be full of Fagus. I've never managed to be there quite at the right time to get the whole lake surrounded by yellow.
Stunning when it is.
Yeah,
I've been there right on peak, and it takes your breath away. Yeah, it really does.
But I can't complain with what I did get out of that trip.
Yeah, no, certainly not.
That's beautiful, mate.
Yeah.
Matt also had a question just from Dan on YouTube, and he was just wondering what was the day that you just simply couldn't pick up the camera after a hard day despite the conditions?
Look at that. That's a Franklin there.
Yeah, that's a Renibus in the middle of the Franklin. There's, the day I described before where we were down in the side of the folded range, and we'd only moved 3 kilometres. Well, it was surrounded by thick scrub, and that was probably the tightest I've ever felt. I think Kent cooked that night, and our arms were falling off. But it was so wet and cold, and there really wasn't anything to take a photo of anyway. So I don't know. I think that would be the times. Most other days I'd try to look for something, but sometimes I always find the start of a trip walking in somewhere, I don't really feel like taking any photos until I've walked for 4 or 5 hours, and then you start seeing stuff and getting into it and getting all your problems out of your head and just getting away, getting at a different pace. So I think there are days where I don't take a lot of photos or don't take any photos, but it's I think if you look out of a tent door and see anything like this in this sort of light, doesn't matter how you were feeling and how completely tired you were, you're going to be out there taking photos in no time, because this sort of stuff just happens in front of you. It will never happen the same way again. So I don't know there's ever a time I wouldn't pick up my camera if it was something like this out the door. Having said that, there's been mornings like this where it's frosty and cold, and I've got up early pre-dawn and pulled on frozen boots and done up frozen laces. And John, when I get back, he's taken my sleeping bag. So,
yeah. Well,
people do have the feelings.
We take pretty light sleeping bags, so if he's going to abandon his, I'll wrap it over mine while he's out there.
Yeah.
Oh,
But to me, how could you miss a morning like this?
Oh, it's magnificent.
yes.
Unbelievable.
It's really, yeah, it's really beautiful work, mate. Absolutely.
You find the power packs, John?
Yep.
All right.
Got 'em.
Yeah.
So I've already typed the answers in for Rosie, but I can show the rest of the audience if you like, if I can hold this. I don't know where this is going to, if I put it up near my face, perhaps you can see this.
Yep.
One is a RAV power device. It's really hard to show you effectively, but I've typed the details into the chat column. It's a Super C Series 26800 milliamp hour portable charger. It's got 2 iSmart ports, a Type C port, and a micro USB input port. That thing is super powerful. It gives you plenty of life for expedition work. I have a number of smaller ones for shorter trips as well. In fact, in our household, we call them festival batteries because we love going to music festivals. And if you're in the mosh pit, it's good to have an extra battery backup. So we have a number of these in the family that we use for music festivals. But I also found the solar panel, which maybe, I don't know, it's hard to see with the fake background. If I put it right in front of my face,
There you go.
perhaps you can see it now. It's an Anchor. It's an Anchor power port solar, and it folds out into a triple panel device that's quite light and flexible, and it has good attachment points. And I've accidentally left it out in the rain overnight, and it still functions perfectly. So I'm going to say it's waterproof. I've been really happy with that. Like Luke mentioned, there are not a lot of Tasmanian trips that suit them. I did actually take it on our trip down the Franklin River this last summer, but even then, you're not going to use it much during the day while you're shooting rapids. But at the end, when you're setting up camp, it can be lying out on the river stones, getting extra solar power for you if you need it.
I actually have the same model as well, but just with one less panel.
Okay.
So they do quite a good job. I think they're meant to be one of the best for converting or efficiency. So yeah, they're really good.
It wasn't a brand that I was familiar with, but I found on a lot of the internet chat rooms, it's very highly regarded.
Yeah, Anchor's well known for their battery blocks as well, actually. Yep. So yeah.
That's terrific. John, do you want to talk a bit about your photography? And I know you've got a set there of some black and white images, and maybe just explain, your journey and show us those.
I can share a few pictures. Similarly to Matt, I also went through a phase where, obviously Dombrowski's was a major influence, and I therefore made sure that when I was younger, I invested in a Linhof Technica and went full large format for a period of time. I was never as heavily committed to large format as Matt was. Matt was, very skillful with his tilt and shift of lenses to really get the benefit of the large format. I had a really beautiful Zeiss Biogon wide-angle lens with my Linhof that was my main go-to lens, and I recorded some images that I was pretty happy with. But it was around about the time of the demise of film that I was really getting comfortable with it. And I found also that while I had my large format Linhof, my camera of choice that I really loved and still wished I had, that I think I created some of my favorite images with, was the Pentax 6.7 medium format outfit. I had I've sold it eventually. I had a beautiful Pentax 6.7. It's just like an enormous overgrown SLR. And I'll share a bunch of images from my preferred methodology, which is darkroom black and white work. I basically spent a considerable amount of time teaching myself, the finer arts of darkroom development and printing. And that was my preferred photographic artwork, which I guess I eventually stepped back from when film became difficult to obtain. I still have a darkroom, but I only develop the odd roll every now and then now, and we don't do any printing anymore, so it's gathering dust. But yeah, so darkroom photographic work, with particularly black and white, is what I really love. So I'll just share a small collection that are scans of prints that I've dragged out and run through a little flatbed scanner. Where's the share screen option here now? If I hit share screen, my PowerPoint, and then slideshow, play from start. Hopefully on your screen now, you can see a whimsical little image of my son doing a handstand on the original massive no dams painting at the helipad on the Kelly Road, which was an integral part of the Franklin campaign. Is that sharing okay?
Yes.
All that, yep.
A couple of these are still large format ones. That one there's out of the Linhof 4.5 Technica.
Big rocks. Beautiful.
Matt showed some footage of Denny King at Melaleuca before. I was lucky enough to know Denny and spent time with him on multiple occasions at Melaleuca, and of course we were very saddened by Denny's death. And this is at Denny's home at Melaleuca. It's obviously his boat's been neglected to fill up with water there.
Beautiful.
This is the really remote and difficult to access part of the west coast north of Port Davey that Matt showed from the peaks looking down onto the coast. And this was part of that long traverse that Matt and I did from the coast through to Lake Pedder.
Beautiful.
And if some of these mountains don't jump out to the audience as being easily recognisable, it's probably because they don't often get visited. This one is Mount Heen, which is quite a high prominence, very close to the west coast. It's over 700 metres, I think, isn't it, Matt?
Yeah, and named after Brenda Heen, who was campaigning for Pedder and died in a plane crash.
It's a tiger moth, I think.
Yep. Oh, beautiful. Beautiful.
With shooting black and white here, once again on the 6.7 format, my favourite accessory here is the red filter to help draw out the textures in the skies.
Have you thought about infrared photography with the digital, John? I don't know if you've seen some of Luke's infrared work, but I reckon you get a real kick out of it.
Look, I'm conscious of its existence. I haven't really done any investigation of it. So maybe, in the future, I hope to get time to take my photography seriously again. And that may be an avenue that I might pursue. In the last few years, I've done quite a lot of, serious photography with my travels, like, Alaska, New Zealand, Nepal, Peru, and of course, Tassie. But I haven't published any of that. It's all just for my own benefit and friends that I've traveled with. And that's all just been basic color digital work.
Wow.
Prince of Wales range.
And that's a really remote range for people that aren't aware of it. It's pretty serious work to get to.
This is the view that got us to the Maxwell River, isn't it?
Yeah, that is. There's the Maxwell Valley down below us there. This is the prominence from which we hatched our plan to eventually achieve paddling that river.
There are some places that you guys have been that, more people have been on the moon. For sure.
That's
Yeah.
true. Although, if I just step back to the Maxwell here, I mean, it's certain that Matt and I achieved, as far as we are aware, unless anybody managed to do it secretly, the first modern day descent of the Maxwell River. However, we've got to point out that deep in this valley, there are caves with hand stencils that were put there 15 to 20,000 years ago as part of the documented occupation up to 35,000 years plus of this area by the Tasmanian Aboriginal people. So we certainly weren't the first to visit there. It's been occupied by Aboriginal people 35,000 years ago.
Yeah, as soon as I said that, I realised my mistake.
Oh no, it wasn't a mistake.
In a modern, well, it is in a modern context.
Yep.
You know, less people have been than on the moon, but in a historic and Indigenous context, that's completely incorrect, and I apologise if I've caused any offence to anyone. But it was just on that. There's a number of caves and areas that have been rediscovered that have hand stencils and have been excavated, particularly the most famous ones on the Franklin River that show that occupancy. But from what I've read, they show occupancy periods, because the occupancy was determined by ice ages and water levels and vegetation differences over different periods of time. And my understanding, without deeply going into it, is that it would show occupation for a period of perhaps several thousand years, and then a period where it was evidence was absent, and then there was a period further on, etc. So it's really fascinating to read about, actually, and you can find some of where some of those areas are. I mean, you certainly can't visit them as a general rule, but you can find where they are by using list map and just seeing that you'll have the Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area, and if you load up that on our Land Information Systems Tasmania map system, you'll see little squares on the maps, and you go, what's that? Why is that excluded? Well, it's because it's Aboriginal land and it's been handed back to them, and you can see just how remote these areas were, and it'd be very Anyway,
it's probably worth pointing out too, Nick, that before Matt and I went into the Maxwell River Valley, we reached out to the Tasmanian Aboriginal community to obtain their permission to travel through that region where the cave is that has the hand stencils. And we had pretty accurate maps showing us where that was, but we'd made a commitment to just paddle straight past it. We didn't enter the cave. We were conscious of its existence. We'd had approval from the Aboriginal community to go there, but we respectfully just moved straight beyond it.
Beautiful. Oh, love that. Wow.
In addition to shooting some infrared film, which I don't have any samples of here now, but I have shot infrared film in the past. But another technique that I've experimented with is Lith printing, which is a little bit cantankerous chemistry. It's quite a difficult chemistry, and your developer bath only allows you to print a few prints consistently, and then it goes off. So it's really tricky, but I love the effects that it gives. So I think I've got some Lith prints coming up shortly. First of all, I think Matt's already shown his image of this vessel, and we were lucky to go here together. This is the wreck of the Svenor on the west coast. It came aground in 1914, I believe, and was a very large trading vessel. And it's a beautiful piece of deteriorating sculpture now.
I understand it doesn't look quite like that now, John.
Yeah, I believe so. I know Janet Fenton of Hobart and Melaleuca. I think she has some more recent images of it, and I believe the front half of it is pretty much disintegrated now, so much less of it that's still extant, I believe.
That shot you've got there of the stern, I think it's a stern, might be the bow. I just love that shot. That's my. I think that was the very first time I became aware of you, John, and your photography. I saw this photograph that I think Matt had published on his Irenabis gallery page, and I just love it. It's just a beautiful, beautiful example of photography and film photography. It's just great, mate.
Thank you very much. It would be Pentax 6.7 with a 45mm wide angle lens, red filter, tripod obviously, and I think T-Max 100 film.
Beautiful, just beautiful. Wow. Mutton bird?
Is it a shearwater? Yeah, I think so, but I'm not 100% certain. Now this is a Lith print. So this is that challenging chemistry that I mentioned before. It gives a really grainy, kind of almost ethereal result, you know, soft contrast, but I personally quite like it. So I persevered with and dabbled with the Lith printing for quite some time.
Does it frustrate you at all, John, that that people can sort of replicate this look so quickly and easily? Well, not just the Lith look, but these old sort of hard-won, hard-fought sort of looks that you get through sensitive darkroom work. Does it frustrate you that it's just so easy for people to replicate that now on digital with filters and that sort of thing?
No, it really doesn't. And I think, you know, it's basically such a diverse art form now that each photographic artist chooses, you know, what they want to project for their personal artwork. And there are some artists who are, you know, really diverse in what they present, and others for whom they, you know, rather specialize in one particular style of imagery. I guess I really like the artists who make an effort to develop their craft to a really high level in whatever it is that they do. And if that's crafting antique looking black and whites through digital, then that's great. You know, that's a beautiful skill set and they're creating beautiful images. So no, I don't have a problem with that at all.
No, it's a great answer.
I have a hankering to get back into the darkroom eventually myself. But that's probably just because I don't have the Lightroom and Photoshop skills to do it digitally. But, you know, I keep telling myself that I must make an effort to learn a good workflow to be able to do the kind of images that I enjoy digitally, but I don't have those skills.
Yeah, it's a beautiful.
Do you find it hard to see a rock stack like that, Nick, even if it's on the summit of a peak?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Yes, John, what do you think of people stacking rocks? And I'm not talking about cans. I'm talking about these ridiculous Instagram rocks that seem to pop up in our riverbeds now.
Now, I've seen your rant about them, and I'm with you. I mean, I'm a rock stack knocker. Okay, whenever I see them, I knock them down.
Good work. Yeah.
And I think this is the last one of my set. And as you can see, it's another really soft contrast, contemplative kind of image. You know, with a bit of symmetry with the central tree there. This is at Hazards Beach down at the Freycinet Peninsula. And that's on a very textured archival paper, but I think that's the last one I have to share.
Beautiful. Thanks so much for that, John.
I was actually keen to understand what food you guys take out on your trips, if you're into the dehydrated stuff, or obviously you've got a lot of weight that you need to carry, and food's a massive part of that.
Yeah, I think John eats better food than me. I think we all used to start. I tend to be very basic, got the same breakfast every day, and it's just, you know, a crushed up wheat bix, tablespoon powdered milk, some muesli, and add a bit of hot water to it. Drink tea constantly, and tended to move towards the freeze-dried meals as the lightest thing possible. But for shorter trips, I'll just grab some noodles or a continental pasta pack from the supermarket and just put up with dry old Vita Wheats. But and John and I I think we're both of the same thought that we'll have multiple small lunches to keep food and energy levels up rather than big long stops. And that's something you learn to walk with the people you're walking with. If you're with a group who wants to have a long, slow lunch, you've got to carry more clothes to keep warm, and you might as well bring more food as well, so you're eating while they're eating. If you're with a group who wants to keep moving fast, then you eat muesli bars and things that you can slam down quickly for nutrition and keep going. And the decision to stop and eat is as much about keeping warm as it is about a social time and eating. But it depends on what you're working and what you're doing.
That's very true.
Mm. Yeah, so I've always found it's one of the challenges to camera gear and food, and trying to take enough of each of them can be a real battle sometimes.
I tend to work on approximately 800 grams of dried food a day.
Okay.
And that's basically, if I don't worry about, being really particular with micronutrients. Like Matt said, we these days, we tend to do some home dehydrating, and we also buy the freeze-dried packs. And often we've had trips where we'll alternate. One night we'll have a home dehydrated meal. The next night we'll have a commercial pack. For lunches, it's almost always Vita Wheats with just a few basic bits on top of Vita Wheats. Nothing much more special than that. Matt's got a big diesel engine, and he keeps fueling that throughout the day. He keeps slamming in muesli bars, on the hour, every hour. I don't take Scroggin, but I will have, occasional muesli bars, occasional little chocolate treats, throughout the day and of an evening, and those basic breakfasts. But if I add it all up, I make sure there's no more than approximately 750, 800 grams per day, and I'm good to keep going and going for days on end.
Yeah, it's worth pointing out, of course, it makes a difference on what sort of trip you're doing and where you're going and who you're with, and the dynamics of the group, as you said, can change. You might decide as a group, if you're going with 4 of you or even 8 of you, you might have a big group dinner that everyone carries some form of ingredient for, or you might be walking with just a couple of you and you have your own dehydrated meals that you buy directly from the shelves. But it just depends on where you're going and how long for, and if you can afford the wait. And there are a lot of people that predominantly just enjoy bushwalking, and they might take their phone or something for their photography, but they're just doing it as a bushwalk rather than a photographic expedition. And they're not carrying pack rafts and that sort of thing, and they have packs that are maybe somewhere between 12 and 15 kilos, and so they can afford to chuck in some more gourmet food. So if you're thinking about getting into bushwalking, you don't have to starve, you don't have to forego some nice food, and it just depends on where you're going and how much you can afford to carry in terms of weight. And if you think about things sensibly and you remove excess packaging, and you can have really great meals. I'm not one of those people. I have extremely boring meals and routine like Matt was talking about, but that's because I just can't be bothered. I just need something that'll fill me up, and at the end of the day, and that's just my choice. But I've seen people take some extremely gourmet things into the Tasmanian wilderness, even on longer trips, and I don't understand how they carry it, but then I realise that they don't have big cameras and lenses and tripods, and so they can have that little bit of extra weight.
There was a question earlier on, I wouldn't mind running past you guys, probably an hour ago actually, from Tom, and it was a little bit, we started off kind of letting people know, and just kind of relative to what your average person is going to be doing, what you guys are doing is pretty extreme, and also historically you talked about 18-year-olds running off doing Franklin trips and without, so I guess there was a question about that. Do you feel like there's a generational shift in terms of the amount of people that are willing to go to the levels that you guys are? Do you see that kind of drying up? You know, when I first went to the Hobart Bushwalking Club, I was the youngest person by about 30 years. I think I was 21, and the collective experience they had was phenomenal, and they could run circles around me in their 60s. I couldn't believe it. So do you feel like there's a generational shift or a drying up, or is it just changing, or is it less visible, or maybe you don't even know? It was a question that came up earlier. It was quite interesting.
I've got some thoughts on that, if you like, Matt. As a teacher myself and teaching outdoor education, I'm just absolutely gobsmacked by how strong and impressive a lot of our kids are these days. They're just doing different things. They're also doing the same things as us, but approaching them in slightly different ways. I'm really inspired by a lot of the young men and women that I've taught, and their pathway into the outdoors varies a bit from ours. There are probably better outdoor ed programs at schools so that kids are actually, sometimes, some of them are actually reasonably well equipped to go and do adventures independently straight out of our outdoor ed programs at some schools. I know the kids that I teach are, by the time they've finished grade 12 outdoor leadership with me, they can just go off and do expeditions with their friends. They're bypassing the club route, but they're picking up friends through their social networks, so things like Instagram friends and their friends on their social media that they choose, and they're off doing stuff. But the pattern pre-COVID was that their ambitions are broader than ours were. When I was growing up, there was no suggestion at all that I could go and do an adventure outside of Tasmania, for example. And so therefore my adventurous thoughts were centered on the southwest of Tassie. That was, my playing field. But the playing field over the last 10 years through globalization, cheaper airfares and more accessibility to other parts of the world, these kids are starting to dream of adventures, and they're heading off to do the Waywash circuit in Peru, or the O route in Patagonia, or go and walk the foothills of the Himalayas. They're doing stuff, they're adventurous, but they're not concentrating their effort into our little rough off-track wilderness backyard of Tassie. There are I know of some very impressive young men and women who are doing stuff here. And I know even more impressive young men and women whose ambitions are just broader these days.
Yeah.
Matt?
Sorry, I would say there was a dip and then a rise back up again, and that around the time that I was starting out doing really hard trips, there was a very small group of people who I'd know or hear about doing the same sort of trips, and that was sort of through the next probably 5 years or so. And I think in general, there was, when I started out, there was a Peak Baggers Guide, and there were these there was a group doing these remote mountains and tagging them all off, and I was certainly very heavy into that, and then got into the river trips. And then somewhere probably around late 90s, 2000s, suddenly there were a whole lot more people doing remote trips again, and you suddenly met people doing pack rafting trips, and you weren't the only one doing it anymore, and or they'd even done rivers that you haven't done, and now there's lots of pack rafting groups. There's people doing remote areas, and I'm not sure it's just because without social media back when I was a teenager, you didn't know about it, but I knew a lot of other people, and you'd know the 20 or 30 people who were trying to get all the peaks in the state on the Peak Baggers Guide, or who were going to the really remote areas, and you'd start hearing of the groups visiting remote areas and forests in the Tarkine, and you'd start recognizing their names over and over again. And I'd say actually there's now more people, it was a lot doing it, then there was a little, and now it's broader again. That's locally, and then as John said, there's also a lot more options now as well. But there's groups who come in and do very much overland track and the name track routes and Frenchman's, and then go to other continents and do amazing trips there. Then there's a lot of local knowledge coming in. And then who was that that man who came over last year, John, did across the state?
Oh, Luffy. Yeah. Louis Philippe, and Nick's friend and mine. Yeah.
Right. So for international people coming for the Tasmanian scrub in winter.
Yeah. But Louis Philippe's a bit of another one out of the. He's one out of the bag, that's for sure. One out of the box. He's amazing adventurer that John certainly had a lot to do with, and I met him at the end of his trip. I picked him up, but what an incredible guy, John.
Yeah, lovely bloke. Good. It doesn't mind suffering.
No, and he certainly suffered on his trip. And despite people trying to convince him otherwise towards the end that he wasn't going to make it, he made it and did a bloody good job. Fantastic. And just for those listening, he traversed from the top of the state to the bottom of the state in winter, unsupported by anyone, and he made it. I can't remember how long it took him in the end. What was it, 3 months, was it?
In the order of 50 odd days, I think, Nick.
Oh, 50 days, month and a half.
Approximately,
yeah. It just phenomenal effort, and he loves his adventures, and his nickname on the Tasmanian bushwalking forums is the Mad Belgian, and he certainly isn't mad. He's very well prepared, and he knows what he's doing, but that sort of trip, quite frankly, is a bit mad, but he showed that it was possible.
His strongest attribute, I think, is his ability to deal with discomfort and suffering. You know, he can suffer, and eventually he gets the rewards of that by achieving his goals.
Yeah. Look, we're pretty much at the 2-hour mark, and we probably have to wind up now. But Luke, Paul, did you have anything further you wanted to pursue?
One last question from them is, what are you guys doing next?
It's always a secret.
Well,
you got to keep it secret, do you? Oh, that's fine.
It's funny because we're at the stage now where we know that people kind of watch what we do if we go out and do something,
Gotcha.
and we both have an appetite for routes that are interesting, because we've done a fair bit of stuff, and we both have an appetite for doing things that nobody's noticed before. So we're still looking for new objectives that are kind of almost eye-popping objectives, even as we get older and they get harder. So we've got a couple of possibilities of mildly eye-popping routes for next summer, and we'll share them when we've achieved them.
If we achieve them.
Perfect. And where can people sort of follow along with you guys, Matt?
To me, it's always afterwards on Facebook's probably the best place to follow me on. I run my little Garmin GPS device spits out a feed to I had to use a page for that. So the Arenibus Gallery is my page, and I tend to post albums of wilderness shots there, but I actually had to run it because the Garmin wouldn't post where I'm up to on a normal page. I think, John, you do the same thing.
I do the same thing. I have a page on Bookface that's called Spotted Quoll, and basically all of my stuff of any note lands on the Spotted Quoll page. So if anybody wants to search up on Facebook for the Spotted Quoll adventures, that's me. I also have a very defunct website, nowhere near as good as Matt's Arenibus Gallery, but McLaine.org has some pack rafting stories and a few pictures on it. And I keep telling myself that one day I'll turn it into a proper website with all my archival stuff. So one day that might happen.
I encourage that you do that, John. Matt, your Arenibus Gallery on the website's a great little resource. Luke did mention it probably needs a bit of an update, which is, I guess, true. I think it relies on Flash. It's sort of going out a bit. But I encourage everyone. So Arenibus is IRENA ABYSS. Is that right?
An extra A in, but yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, yes, I did put an extra A.
I think if you Googled it or autocorrect.
Yeah, Irene Abyss. I'll just type it in the chat here on.
We can add some links to the description of the YouTube video as well, so that everyone can find them that way.
But it's definitely worth checking out, and I would also. You've both got YouTube channels. One's Irene Abyss, and the other one's just under your name, isn't it, John?
Yeah, it's pretty grim. I mean, there's a couple of interesting old videos there, but my editing skills are really naff, and there's a couple of quirky old films there.
You might think they're naff, but I absolutely love how genuine they feel. And everybody that's watching, you really do need to look at John's video on his YouTube site of their Vanishing Falls trip. Vanishing Falls is a serious undertaking for people to get to, and they walked up a very steep southern ranges carrying full packs and a pack raft, bashed down into an incredibly dense gully or a valley, and then onto the river above the Vanishing Falls, and then sort of semi-pack rafted down until they got to the falls, and then they had to walk out. We're talking a period of 10 days or something like that, but rather than reveal it all, watch the video, and it's worth seeing, and you'll see Matt looking very worse for wear in some of the video, particularly his shirt, and when he takes a bit of a tumble, and his feet look absolutely amazing. So yeah, definitely look at the Vanishing Falls trip. I think you'll get a real insight into just how difficult some of this stuff is. But it's fascinating, and we love seeing it, fellas. So please keep on producing it for those like me who will never get to some of these really remote places.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you.
It's been fun to be involved. Thanks for having us.
Hey, Matt, have they still got that big photo panel up in the hospital that we put together?
Yeah, I should have put a photo up. It's right across the main wall of the ICU, and attracts a lot of attention. It's the most colourful thing in the unit. It looks fantastic.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah,
thank you very much.
Matt and I worked together a long time ago to create kind of images a little bit relevant for what's behind me, actually, to lighten up the space of the ICU, which is obviously full of short-term trauma and intensity, and there's a lot to be said about nature and wilderness photography and its role in calming and grounding people and helping their mental space. And it was a real honor to be part of something to put it to an unexpected but particularly powerful sort of use. So thanks for thinking of me, Matt.
Oh, it's a lovely shot. I wish I'd had a photo for you, but I don't. I'm ready to go.
Oh, that's all right. Hopefully I don't get to see it in person.
No.
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Well,
Awesome.
So, yeah, keep well, keep safe, keep being amazing. Thanks,
Yeah.
Nick, for organising these amazingly courageous, adventurous human beings and gifted image makers to come on the show. It was a real treat for us Tassie people in particular that have got more of an idea of what these guys have actually done.
Unbelievable.
Also, do you want to?
Before we part, we might just mention as well next week, same time again next week, we'll be talking about photography books and have some special guests lined up for that as well. So that should be a fascinating episode if you're interested in books or just what it takes to put out a photography book. We're really excited about that episode ourselves. So as we would.
Yeah, we're going to have a great panel for that one too. And
Matt, you're holding up one of Peter's first book there.
Yeah, it's one of the ones that would have got me started when I was very young, picking up this book at my mum's.
Awesome.
Beautiful.
Oh, all right. Is that the end then, Luke?
That is it. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us.
Thanks,
And
gentlemen. Thanks for coming.
Thanks again to John and Matt. And we'll see you again.
Well done, guys.
All right. Bye.